This world, this dunya, was never meant to be our resting place. It is a realm where loss and suffering are woven into the very fabric of existence. Humanity was not created in ease, but, in suffering, placed within a world of endless trials. For many, the test begins not with a roar, but with silence. Meet a man named Muhammad. To his neighbors, he was Mashhadi Muhammad Jahangir, an upright soul who traded in carpets and blankets. He lived simply, with quiet dignity and enough to sustain his family. He walked through life with a steady heart. But peace is a fragile thing. Muhammad's life was not destroyed by a storm he could see, but by a tide that pulled his feet from beneath him. His prosperity began to decline. His capital vanished. Where once there was security, now there was only the crushing weight of debt, 1,000 tomans owed, and not a single toman to his name. He, who once walked the markets with pride, now stayed inside his house for months. He ventured out only at night, in disguise, to avoid the eyes of those he owed. The trial of poverty is bitter. But it was merely the threshold. One night, the darkness of the world reached his doorstep. A creditor, fueled by impatience and anger, came to his home. Muhammad's wife stood behind the door, sheltering their 2-year-old child in her arms. The creditor kicked the door. It struck them both. Within hours, the child was gone. His wife fell into a sickness that would linger for years, a shadow of the woman she once was. Muhammad sat in the wreckage of his life, selling his very cups and saucers just to buy a piece of bread. In that moment, there are no words. Only the heavy, suffocating silence of a heart emptied of all grief except the grief of its loss. He turned to Allah, not with a loud lament, but in a silence that echoed through the heavens. We often ask, if God is most gracious, why is there such tribulation? We see loss as punishment, a sign of divine anger. But the sources tell us a different truth. The Messenger of Allah said, when Allah loves a people, He afflicts them with trials. The prophets, the best of all mankind, were tested most severely. Through rejection, exile, the death of their own children. Muhammad's suffering was not abandonment. It was the beginning of purification. We think of prayer like an order we place, expecting immediate delivery. But Allah answers in a divine framework. Sometimes the answer is yes. Often, it is delayed. Sometimes, it is a protective redirection toward a greater good we cannot yet see. In the words of a poet, how many blessings are hidden from you beneath all afflicted trials. Muhammad stood at the edge of his own life, a bag in his hand, preparing to leave his home to seek the mediation of the holy imams. He was exhausted, hungry, and broken. He sat in a dark date orchard, weeping uncontrollably, unaware that his patience in poverty and hardship was the very definition of righteousness. Why does the Master of the worlds choose to test those he loves with the very things that break them? Is it possible that the silence we feel is not rejection, but an invitation? Muhammad is still in that orchard. The night is still dark. The road ahead is not yet visible. And for now, there is only the waiting. Time is the heaviest burden for a heart in waiting. When the initial shock of calamity fades, it is replaced by a long, agonizing stretch of days where nothing changes. For Muhammad Jahangir, the weeks turned into months, and the months into a year of wandering. He had left his home in Iran, carrying only a small bag and a heart heavy with the names of his creditors. He hoped that in the shadows of the holy shrines in Iraq, the heavens would finally speak. But the heavens remained silent. He walked the streets of Karbala and Najaf, a stranger in a strange land. He moved through the crowds of pilgrims who seemed to find the very miracles he was denied. He watched them. Fathers lifting their healthy children. Traders counting their profits. Travelers rejoicing in their ease. Every smile he witnessed felt like a sharp reminder of what he had lost, his capital, his dignity, and the child whose laughter had been silenced by a creditor's violent hand. Muhammad poured his heart into his du'as. The same words. The same tears. The same desperate hope. Night after night, he begged for a way out, for a miraculous opening of the gates that he had heard about in the stories of the pious. Yet he remained, exhausted with travel and hunger, sitting in the dust while the world moved past him. The inner struggle is the hardest part of the test. It is the quiet voice that whispers in the depths of the night, is Allah even listening anymore? This spiritual disappointment breaks more hearts than poverty ever could. We live in a world of instant responses. We expect our prayers to be answered like orders placed online, immediate, guaranteed. But the spiritual path is not a transaction. It is a training. When the response is delayed, it is often because the heart is being trained, not ignored. Just as a seed must remain beneath the dark soil, invisible and seemingly dead, before it breaks through the earth, the believer's dua is often working in the unseen world of destiny. Allah's silence is not absence. It is the redirection of a Lord who knows what we do not. Think of the Prophet Yaqub, who complained of his anguish and distress unto Allah for decades while his son Yusuf was lost to him. For years, there was no sign. No news. Only the fading of his eyesight from the sheer weight of his grief. Yet in that silence, Yusuf was being prepared to save a nation. The delay was the very mechanism of the miracle. Muhammad sat in a dark date orchard on the outskirts of the city. The shadows of the trees stretched like giant fingers over the cracked earth. He saw dates that had fallen to the ground. But he did not eat them. He chose patience over the easy path of the unlawful. He was lonely. Absolutely alone. And the self-doubt began to claw at his mind. He sat there, placing his bag on the ground, and began to weep uncontrollably. This is the threshold of sabr. It is the moment where you choose patience, not because you see the light, but because you trust the one who created the darkness. Muhammad remained there, a man caught between the lowly dunya and the divine promise. He refused to complain against his Lord, even as his heart broke. He had no work. He had no fare for the bus. He had nothing but a silent prayer that felt as though it had vanished into the starless sky. The night in the orchard is long. The wind is cold. And Muhammad is still waiting. Night has fallen upon the orchard, and with it, the last of Muhammad's strength. He sits in the silent and dark date orchard, a man who has traveled thousands of miles only to reach a destination that feels like a dead end. There is no bus. There is no money. There is only the biting wind and the hollow ache of a stomach that has forgotten the weight of bread. Beneath him, the earth is littered with dates that have fallen from the trees. They are within his reach. They could end the dizziness in his head and the trembling in his limbs. But Muhammad does not touch them. Even at this lowest emotional and material point, he remembers his Lord. He thinks, it is not lawful for me to eat without the permission of the owner. This is the peak of the trial. It is not just the poverty. It is the absolute exhaustion with travel and hunger, coupled with a silence from the heavens that feels like a closed door. In this darkness, the temptation to lose faith is not a roar. It is a whisper. It whispers that the years of honesty and uprightness were for nothing. It whispers that a Lord who loves his servant would not leave him to rot in a nameless garden in Iraq. This is the crushing trauma of feeling that Allah has abandoned the very soul that cries out to him. Muhammad places his small bag on the ground. He is absolutely alone. The faces of his sick wife and his deceased child flicker in his mind like dying candles. He begins to weep uncontrollably, his cries echoing through the rows of trees. He is no longer asking for carpets or tomans. He is asking for the one thing a human cannot live without, a sign that he is still seen. We often mistake the emptying of our hands for a sign of divine anger. But the sources tell us, when Allah loves a people, he afflicts them with trials. If the prophets, the best of all people, were tested most severely, then why do we expect our path to be paved with ease? When Allah wants to raise a soul to the highest ranks of the hereafter, he first strips away every worldly crutch. He empties the hand so that the heart has no choice but to achieve sincerity. Muhammad's tears are not a sign of weakness. They are sincerity born from pain. In the depths of this orchard, Muhammad reaches his final surrender. He stops fighting the decree. He stops trying to control the outcome. He realizes that he is not asked about what he does, but we are the ones who will be questioned. He turns his face to the earth and whispers the words that define a believer. We belong to God and to him we shall return. This is the annihilation of the ego. It is the moment where the servant recognizes that there is no escape and no exit except with Allah. He sits in the dirt, humbling himself, accepting that whatever God has measured out for him, whether good or evil, is rooted in a profound wisdom he cannot yet grasp. He does not know that God's help is near. He does not know that one hardship cannot overcome twofold ease. For now, there is no miracle. There is no elegant gentleman appearing from the shadows yet. There is only a man in a dark garden, clutching a small bag, waiting for a bus that may never come. But for the first time in years, the anguish and distress are gone. In their place is a quiet, heavy hope, a certainty that even in the silence, he is being held. The test is at its peak. The hands are empty. The heart is open. And the world is still silent. Sincerity has a fragrance that the heavens cannot ignore. In the depths of that silent Iraqi orchard, Muhammad Jahangir had reached a point where his hands were truly empty and his heart was finally open. He had refused the fallen dates of the orchard, choosing patience over an unlawful morsel even in his hunger. It is often at this precise moment, the moment of total surrender to the divine decree, that the turning of destiny begins. But Allah rarely sends help with a thunderclap. He sends it quietly, through small, unexpected changes that whisper of a Lord who hearkens to one who is exhausted in the wilderness. As Muhammad sat weeping, an elegant gentleman wearing an Arab headgear appeared suddenly from the shadows of the date trees. He did not offer a purse of gold or a palace. He simply asked, "Why are you so anxious? Do not be sad. I know you. In our greatest trials, we often feel invisible." But this stranger brought the first sign of relief, the realization that the believer is never truly forgotten. "I will guide you," the stranger said. "Pick up your bag and come with me." Muhammad followed. After walking perhaps only 10 steps, the impossible happened. The tangled, dark orchard vanished, and they stood before a paved road. In the spiritual life, one hardship cannot overcome twofold ease. And here, the ease was manifesting with every step. A bus appeared, its headlights cutting through the gloom of his despair. It stopped by itself. This was the beginning of a journey where destiny was clearly shifting. From one bus to another, Muhammad was carried toward Karbala. Driver after driver took him aboard, yet no one asked for a bus fare, as if they had been appointed on this job from before. When Allah decides to make a way out for those mindful of Him, the very laws of the dunya seem to bend in their favor. Yet the healing had begun inside Muhammad long before the bus arrived. He had already found inner peace through his surrender in the orchard. He arrived in Karbala not as a beggar seeking coin, but as a servant entering the service of the holy imams. He stood in the sanctuary of Imam Hussein, weeping, not out of bitterness, but out of a desperate need for his life to be reformed. As he exited the shrine on the day of Arbeen, the same elegant gentleman appeared once more. He handed Muhammad 10 dinars. When Muhammad, still tethered to his worldly worries, whispered that it was too little, the man replied with divine weight, "They are not less. If they prove insufficient, I will give you more." These were not ordinary coins. They were strange dinars that exuded a fragrance unlike anything of this world. This fragrance was the scent of barakah, the divine increase that defies mathematics. Every item Muhammad purchased with that small amount of money gave a profit many times over. His character, forged in the furnace of poverty, was now ready to handle the weight of prosperity without falling back into the sinful activities of his past. Growth comes through character, not comfort. Muhammad had been emptied so that he could be filled with a wealth that would not corrupt him again. He was no longer a man running from creditors in the dark. He was a man walking in the light of a divine opportunity. The help of Allah had arrived, but it had come subtly. Through a stranger. A free bus ride. And 10 fragrant dinars. It was a miraculous opening of the gates that started with a single tear in a dark orchard. The debts are still there. The sick wife is still waiting in calm. But the silence of the heavens has been broken. The tide has turned. And for Muhammad Jahangir, the sun is finally beginning to rise. The ledgers of debt are finally closed. The man who once moved through the shadows of calm in disguise now walks openly in the light of day, known to all as an upright and truthful soul. Mashhadi Muhammad Jahangir has returned to his family, not with the mountains of gold he once possessed, but with something far more enduring, a heart that has been reformed. Stability has returned, but it is a stability of a different kind. Muhammad now lives a life of moderate rank, trading in carpets and blankets with a quiet financial capability. Traders are willing to entrust him with goods worth 100,000 tomans, yet he only takes what he can handle. He chooses the safety of self-sufficiency over the trap of excess. Looking back at the years of pain, the cold nights in the orchard, the hunger, and the crushing weight of the 1,000 tomans owed, the mosaic of destiny finally begins to make sense. In the Islamic tradition, we are taught that all of the believer's affair is good. When prosperity first led Muhammad into sinful activities, his wealth was not a blessing, but a veil. The decline he suffered, though agonizing, was a divine intervention, a protective redirection. We often see loss as a void. But in the hands of the All-Wise, it is the removal of a poison. Allah emptied Muhammad's hand so that he would not lose his soul. The loss of his previous capital was the price of his spiritual freedom. Even the most heartbreaking trial, the loss of his child and the sickness of his wife, is understood through this lens. The sources tell us that on the day of judgment, the one who suffered most will be dipped into paradise for a moment and will truthfully say, "I have never undergone suffering." Muhammad realizes now that his life is better than he could have ever imagined. He didn't just get his business back. He got a miraculous opening of the gates through those 10 strange dinars that exuded a fragrance. That fragrance was the scent of barakah, the hidden goodness that allows a small amount to give a profit many times over. He discovered that patience in poverty and hardship is the true mark of righteousness. He looks at his life and sees the hidden benefits behind every trial. Just as Prophet Ibrahim's trial with Sarah eventually led to the birth of the seal of the prophets, Muhammad's trial led him to the service of the holy imams and a partnership built on the highest guarantor, the Almighty Allah himself. Allah never delays without wisdom. And he never withholds without a plan to replace what was lost with something better. Muhammad prayed only that his debts be cleared and he become moderately self-sufficient. He did not ask for the return of his former vanity, for he had seen its evil effects. His gratitude now is not for the profit he makes, but for the divine opportunity of repentance and the ability to fulfill his promises. Patience always pays, just not on our timeline. It is a manifold ease that follows a single hardship. Let this be the moral we carry in our hearts. Do not judge the book of your life by the chapter of your hardship. If you are mindful of Allah, He will make a way out. Trust the divine decree, for the one who feels content with the trials, Allah will be pleased with him. O Allah, the sustainer of all existence, we belong to you and to you we shall return. We ask for your forgiveness and our well-being in this world and the hereafter. Do not make us among those who are tested to fail, but grant us the strength to see the beauty and wisdom in your decree. Ameen.